He stopped to help an old woman cross the road. But what he didn't know was that she owned the city he was struggling to survive in. And that simple act of kindness was about to change his life forever. The city moved like it always did, fast, loud, and completely indifferent to the struggles of those caught in its current. Cars honked in waves, their sounds blending into a single, unrelenting roar. Pedestrians pushed past each other with phones pressed to their ears, briefcases swinging, eyes fixed straight ahead. The morning sun beat down on cracked pavement, and the air smelled of diesel fuel and street food frying in oil. It was just another day. Just another crowd. Before we start, can I ask one tiny favor? This story took me days to write, record, and edit, every frame, every emotion, every sound. It costs you nothing to support me, but it truly means everything. Please, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and comment your location below. I want to know where my amazing viewers are watching from. I read every single comment, and I'll be giving shout-outs in my next video. Today's shout-out goes to Tony from Sri Lanka, Primrose from Jamaica, Karen from Trinidad and Olivia from New York. Now back to our story. Somewhere in the middle of it all, barely visible among the rushing bodies, an old woman stood at the edge of the road. She was small, fragile, her back slightly bent with age. One hand gripped a wooden walking stick that trembled under her weight. The other hand hovered in the air, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. She tried to step forward, but the traffic didn't slow. The light turned green, then red, then green again. No one looked twice. No one slowed their pace. Except him. A young man in a faded blue shirt and worn brown shoes, already running late for something important, slowed his pace. He had been walking quickly, his mind racing through everything he needed to say at the interview waiting for him across town. But then he saw her. He glanced at the woman, then at the sea of cars rushing past, then back at her again. Something in his chest tightened. A quiet voice inside him said, "Keep walking. You're already late." But another voice, softer and older, whispered, "Stop." He exhaled slowly, turned around, and walked toward her. "Ma," he said gently, his voice cutting through the noise. "Let me help you." She looked up at him with cloudy, uncertain eyes. For a moment, she seemed surprised that anyone had noticed her at all. Then her face softened, and she smiled faintly, a smile that carried years of weariness but also something like gratitude. He took her arm gently, carefully, as if she were made of glass. Together, they began to step into the road. The traffic lights changed. Cars surged forward. Halfway across, a truck barreled toward them, its horn blaring like a warning siren. The driver wasn't slowing down. The young man's heart slammed against his ribs. Without thinking, he pulled her back, his arm wrapping around her shoulders protectively. The truck roared past, so close that he felt the wind it left behind, hot and violent. The smell of rubber and exhaust filled his lungs. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, breathing hard, the traffic rushing around them like a river around stones. Then, slowly, they continued, one step at a time. When they finally reached the other side, she turned to face him. Her hand, still trembling, reached up and touched his arm. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made him pause. "The world has forgotten kindness," she said. "But heaven hasn't." He didn't know what to say. So he just smiled, a small, uncertain smile, and nodded. Then he turned and walked away, glancing back once before disappearing into the crowd. If you believe kindness still matters in this world, hit the like button right now. His name was Tund. He was 25 years old. A university graduate with a degree in business administration, a certificate he had worked 4 years to earn, and a future that felt farther away with every passing day. He lived in a cramped shared apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood where the streets were unpaved and the electricity came and went like a rumor. The walls of his room were thin enough to hear his neighbors' arguments, his landlord's footsteps, and the rain when it drummed against the tin roof at night. He worked odd jobs to survive. loading trucks at the market before dawn, delivering packages on a borrowed motorcycle, washing cars in front of office buildings. Anything that paid something, even if it wasn't much, even if it wasn't nearly enough. Today was supposed to be different. Today he had an interview at a real company, a logistics firm in the heart of the city. A friend from university had put in a good word for him, called in a favor, and managed to get Tun's name on the shortlist. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. The kind of chance he hadn't had in months. Maybe longer. But he missed it. Because he stopped to help an old woman cross the road. When he finally arrived at the office building, breathless and sweating, his shirt clinging to his back, the receptionist didn't even look up from her computer screen. "You're too late," she said flatly. The manager already left. He had other appointments. Tun stood there, his chest still heaving, staring at the closed glass door behind her. He wanted to say something. To explain. To ask if there was any way, any chance, he could reschedule. But the receptionist had already returned to her typing, her fingers clicking against the keyboard in a rhythm that told him the conversation was over. Outside, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. A message from his landlord. Friday. Pay or pack. That was it. No negotiation. No grace period. Just 4 words that felt like a sentence. That night, his roommate sat across from him at the small wooden table they shared, counting coins and crumpled bills under the dim glow of a single bulb. "You helped someone again today, didn't you?" Tund didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling, where a crack ran from one corner to the other like a scar. "You know what your problem is," his roommate continued, his voice tired but not unkind. "You think being good pays rent. It doesn't. This is Lagos. This city doesn't care about good hearts. It cares about money, connections, survival." Tund wanted to argue. He wanted to say that kindness mattered, that doing the right thing had to count for something, that the universe kept some kind of record. But he couldn't. Because his roommate was right about one thing. Kindness hadn't paid him back yet. Not once. Not ever. Still, he kept hoping it would. The days blurred together after that. He applied for more jobs. Sent his CV to companies he'd never heard of. Stood in long lines at employment agencies where hundreds of other young men stood with the same desperate hope in their eyes. He got no responses. No calls. No emails. Just silence. He prayed in the mornings, kneeling beside his mattress on the floor, his voice barely above a whisper. He worked through the afternoons, his body aching, his hands blistered. And he lay awake at night, staring at that crack in the ceiling, wondering if God was even listening. His mother used to tell him, "Serve where others boast, and heaven will lift you." But she was gone now. She had been gone for 3 years. And heaven felt quiet, distant, like a place he couldn't quite reach. 3 days later, Tund was walking through the market, moving slowly between the stalls, looking for the cheapest food he could find. His stomach had been empty since the night before. He had 1,200 naira left to his name. Enough for maybe 2 more meals if he was careful. That's when he saw her again. The old woman. She was sitting on a low wooden stool beside a fruit stall, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. She wore a simple wrapper tied around her waist and a faded headscarf that covered most of her grey hair. She looked like anyone else in the market, just another grandmother buying mangoes, blending into the crowd. But when she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with recognition. "You," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise of bargaining and laughter. "The young man from the road." Tun stopped, surprised. He hadn't expected to see her again. Hadn't expected her to remember him. "Good afternoon, Ma," he said quietly, walking over to her. "Come here. Sit with me." He hesitated. He didn't have time to sit. Didn't have time for small talk. But something in her tone, firm but warm, made him obey. She gestured to the fruit seller, spoke a few words in Yoruba, And before Tund could protest, 2 plates of jollof rice and fried chicken appeared in front of them. "Ma, I didn't ask for." "Eat," she said firmly, pushing the plate toward him. "When was the last time you had a full meal?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because if he spoke, his voice might crack, and he didn't want to cry in front of a stranger. So he just picked up the spoon and ate. The food was warm, rich. The kind of meal he hadn't tasted in weeks. He ate slowly at first, then faster, unable to stop himself. She watched him for a while, her expression soft but unreadable. Then she spoke again, her voice calm but searching, as if she were testing him. "Tell me something, my son. Do you believe the rich owe the poor?" He looked up, confused, the spoon halfway to his mouth. "Ma." "A simple question," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Do the wealthy have a debt to those who have nothing?" He put down the spoon and thought for a moment, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I don't know, Ma. I just think we all owe each other something. Rich or poor. We're all human beings. We all need help sometimes." She nodded slowly, as if his answer had confirmed something she already suspected. "And if helping someone cost you everything you had left," she continued, leaning forward slightly, "would you still do it?" He exhaled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the question. "I help because I've been helpless before," he said quietly. "I know what it feels like when people look right through you. Like you're invisible. Like you don't matter. So if I can stop someone from feeling that way, even for a moment, I will." She smiled then, a small knowing smile that reached her eyes. "You have a good heart, my son," she said softly. "Too good for this city." Nearby, a man in a plain white shirt leaned against a modest gray car, waiting. He didn't say anything. Didn't draw attention to himself. Just watched quietly, his arms folded across his chest. Tund didn't notice him. He was too focused on finishing his meal, too grateful for the unexpected kindness. Friday came like a storm no one predicted. Tund's landlord knocked on the door early in the morning, louder than necessary, his fist pounding against the thin wood like a hammer. "Open up. I'm not playing with you anymore." Tund stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, his body heavy with exhaustion. He opened the door to find the landlord standing there, arms crossed, his face hard and unyielding. "Sir, please," Tund said, his voice hoarse. "Just one more week. I have an interview on Monday. I promise I'll pay you." "Interview?" The landlord laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Will an interview pay me my money? Will it? I've heard this story before. Pack your things. You have 1 hour." And just like that, it was over. Tund stood there, staring at the landlord's back as he walked away. His roommate sat on the edge of his bed, silent, watching. He looked guilty, but not guilty enough to say anything. Not guilty enough to help. Tund stuffed his few belongings into a duffel bag, some clothes, a notebook, his certificates rolled up carefully in a plastic sleeve. He moved mechanically, numbly, as if his body had detached from his mind. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just packed. Outside, the sky was grey and heavy with the promise of rain. Tund slung the bag over his shoulder and started walking. He didn't have money for a bus. Didn't have anywhere to go. His phone had stopped working days ago after he dropped it in a puddle, and he hadn't been able to afford a repair. He was alone in a city of millions. Then the rain started. It came down hard and fast, cold and unforgiving, soaking him in seconds. He ducked under a broken awning outside a closed shop, clutching his bag to his chest, and just sat there on the wet concrete. Water dripped from his hair, from his nose, pooling around his feet. He felt cold, wet, defeated. "God," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "What did I do wrong? I tried. I really tried." Silence. Just the rain. Then, through the downpour, he heard the low hum of an engine. A car pulled up beside him, its headlights cutting through the grey. The door opened, and there she was. The old woman. She stepped out holding a black umbrella, unfazed by the storm raging around her. She walked over to him slowly, her shoes splashing in the puddles, and stood in front of him. For a moment, she just looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "Take this," she said, placing the umbrella in his hand. "Ma, I can't. Take it." Her voice was firm but kind. Then she reached into the pocket of her wrapper and pressed something small into his palm. A card. Thick. Embossed. "Come see me tomorrow. Tell them Madame Ronk sent you." Before he could respond, before he could even process what was happening, she turned and walked back to the car. The door closed. The engine hummed. And she was gone. Tund sat there in the rain, staring down at the card in his hand. It was white with gold lettering. An address. No phone number. No explanation. Just an address. What would you do if a stranger who barely knew you offered help like this? Comment below. The next morning, Tund stood outside a towering gate made of wrought iron and stone. Behind it, stretching far into the distance, he could see a long driveway lined with palm trees, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. There were fountains. Manicured lawns. Flower beds bursting with color. And at the end of the driveway, rising like something out of a dream, was a house. No, not a house. A mansion. White walls. Glass windows. Columns. It looked more like a palace than a place where people actually lived. He looked down at the card in his hand, then back up at the gate. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. Two security guards approached, both wearing uniforms, their faces stern and suspicious. "What do you want?" Tund swallowed hard. "I'm here to see Madame Ronk. She gave me this." He held up the card with trembling fingers. The guards exchanged glances. One of them took the card, studied it closely, turning it over in his hands. Then his expression changed. He suddenly straightened up, his tone shifting from suspicion to caution. "Wait here." 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Tund stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, the gate began to open, its heavy iron bars sliding apart with a low mechanical hum. "Come in." Tund was escorted inside by one of the guards. His eyes widened as he walked up the driveway. The compound was massive. Bigger than anything he'd ever seen. Marble floors. Polished glass. A fountain in the center courtyard. Water cascading down in elegant arcs. Gardeners moved quietly among the hedges, trimming them into perfect shapes. Maids in uniforms carried trays between rooms, their footsteps silent on the stone. And there, standing at the top of the stairs leading to the main entrance, was the old woman. But she looked different now. Completely different. She wore an elegant lace gown in deep burgundy, embroidered with gold thread. Her hair was neatly wrapped in a matching headscarf. Her posture was strong, dignified, commanding. She looked like royalty. When she saw him, she smiled warmly and descended the stairs slowly, gracefully. "Welcome, my son." Tund climbed the stairs toward her, still in shock, still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Ma, you live here?" "Yes. But I thought that I was poor." She chuckled softly, a sound filled with quiet amusement. "Money doesn't announce itself when it wants to test character, Tund." She led him inside to a sitting room that took his breath away. High ceilings. Crystal chandeliers. Portraits in gold frames lining the walls. Awards and plaques displayed on shelves. Leather couches that looked like they'd never been sat on. She gestured to a chair, and he sat, still trying to process everything. "I own many things in this city," she said calmly, settling into the chair across from him. "Land. Buildings. Businesses. Companies. Companies." His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes. Including the one that rejected you last week." His heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat. What? She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. I've been watching for months, Tund. Searching. Looking for someone who still remembers what it means to serve. Not for applause. Not for reward. Not for recognition. Just because it's right. Just because it's human. And then you stopped to help me cross that road. He couldn't speak. He just stared at her, his mind racing, trying to catch up. I wanted to know, she continued, her voice soft but deliberate, if humility still survives in this generation. If kindness still exists in the hearts of young men who have nothing. And you showed me it does. Madame Ronk offered him a job. Not a grand position. Not a title that would impress anyone. Just a personal aide. Someone to manage her schedule, handle her correspondence, coordinate with her lawyer and accountant. It was modest work, quiet work, but it came with a salary that felt like a fortune to Tund. It also came with a small room on the estate. Clean, private, with a bed that didn't sag in the middle, and 3 meals a day. To Tund, it felt like a miracle. But not everyone was happy about his arrival. Madame Ronk had 3 adult children, 2 sons and a daughter, and they despised him from the moment he set foot in the house. So you're the street boy Mama picked up? The eldest son stood in the hallway, arms crossed, his expensive watch glinting under the light. He looked Tund up and down with barely concealed contempt. Tund kept his head down, his voice steady. I'm just here to work, sir. Good. Then stay in your place. Don't get any ideas. The daughter was worse. She made snide comments whenever he passed her. Mocked his clothes. Called him names under her breath. The younger son ignored him completely, as if Tund were invisible, as if acknowledging his existence would somehow diminish his own. But Tund endured it. He remembered his mother's words. He stayed quiet, worked hard, and treated everyone with respect, even those who showed him none. He woke early. Stayed late. Handled every task with care. And slowly, quietly, Madame Ronk began to notice. She began to rely on him more. Not just for errands, but for companionship. She would call him into her study in the evenings, asking his opinion on matters she once discussed only with her lawyer. She laughed more when he was around. Her face softened. And slowly, something shifted between them. She wasn't just his employer anymore. She was becoming something like family. But her children grew angrier. They whispered in corners, their voices low and sharp. They plotted, waited, watched. It happened on a Tuesday night. Tund was in the kitchen, helping the cook prepare tea for Madame Ronk, when he heard a scream. A sharp, piercing scream that cut through the quiet of the house like a blade. He dropped the cup he was holding and ran toward the sound. Madame Ronk had collapsed in the hallway. She lay on the marble floor, her body still, her eyes closed. One of the maids knelt beside her, sobbing, her hands shaking. Tund dropped to his knees, cradling her head gently, his heart racing. Call an ambulance. Now. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was pale. Her lips barely moved. Don't let them destroy what I built, she whispered, her voice so faint he almost didn't hear it. Then her eyes closed, and she went still. The hospital was chaos. Doctors rushed in and out of the room. Machines beeped. Nurses shouted instructions. Tund stayed in the waiting room, his hands clasped together, praying under his breath. He didn't leave. Not once. But her children. They were in another room. And they were arguing. The estate should be divided equally. Equally. I'm the firstborn. I deserve the largest share. She has properties in 3 states. We need to act quickly before the government gets involved. Tund couldn't believe what he was hearing. Their mother was fighting for her life just down the hall, and they were already dividing her wealth like vultures circling a dying animal. A week passed. Madame Ronk remained unconscious. The doctors said she had slipped into a coma. They didn't know if she would wake up. Then her lawyer called Tund privately, pulling him aside in the hospital corridor. "She left something for you," the lawyer said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "A sealed document. She named you executor of her final instruction." Tund's breath caught. "What? No. That's not. The will is legal. If she doesn't survive, you'll have final say over her estate." When the children found out, they exploded. "That's impossible. She can't do that. He's a nobody. A street rat." But the will was legal, binding, unbreakable. Then, 2 days later, something impossible happened. Madame Ronk woke up. Her children rushed to her bedside, tears streaming down their faces, relief flooding their voices. "Mama! Thank God! We were so worried." But Madame Ronk wasn't smiling. Her eyes were clear, sharp, focused. "Stay back," she said coldly. "All of you." They froze. "I heard everything," she continued, her voice steady despite her weakness. "Every word you said while I lay there. Every plan you made. Every lie you told yourselves to justify your greed." Silence filled the hospital room like a living thing. Even the machines seemed to hesitate, their beeping slower, quieter, as if they, too, were waiting for what would come next. The 3 children stood frozen, guilt painted across their faces like ash after a fire. None of them could meet her eyes. The youngest shifted uncomfortably, the eldest clenched his fists, but no one spoke. "And now you know the truth." Her gaze moved from one face to another, unblinking. "I was never in a coma. My doctor and I arranged it. To see your true hearts." Her words cut through the air like glass shattering. The eldest son stumbled back a little, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. The daughter pressed a trembling hand to her lips. The youngest looked down at his shoes, his chest rising and falling too fast. Her children stood there, speechless, their faces drained of color. "And I saw them," she said quietly. "Clearly." Then she turned her head slowly, her gaze landing on Tund, who stood quietly in the corner. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes red from nights without sleep. He looked nothing like the people in that room, yet somehow, he looked like the only one who belonged there. "The world measures success by wealth," she said softly. "But I measure it by who kneels to lift another. You passed every test I gave you, Tund. Not because you're perfect, but because you're faithful." A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. He lowered his head, not out of shame, but out of humility. The moment stretched, heavy with a kind of quiet reverence. A week later, Madame Ronk gathered her children in the main hall. Morning sunlight poured through tall glass windows, spilling across the marble floor in golden streaks. The air was heavy, charged with tension and unspoken remorse. No one spoke. No one dared move. The only sound was the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock against the wall. "I've decided to make a change," she said finally, her voice calm but commanding, echoing through the vast room. "Tund will now lead my charity foundation. He will also oversee the rebuilding project in the slum where he once lived. Full salary, full authority, full respect." Her words landed like thunder. Her children stood frozen, humiliated, unable to meet her gaze. Pride battled guilt on their faces, but neither won. Tund took a hesitant step forward, his voice breaking. "Ma, I can't accept this. I just wanted a job. A simple job. Not this. Not charity." She turned to him, her expression softening, the corners of her eyes crinkling with something that looked like both love and pride. "Charity," she repeated gently, almost amused. "My son, you've already been working for God. I'm just signing your appointment letter." He lowered his head, overwhelmed, his shoulders trembling slightly as he fought back tears. Then she turned back to her children, her tone firmer now, her words sharp as truth. "As for you 3, if you want to remain part of this family, you will work under Tund's leadership. You will learn what he already knows. How to serve without expecting applause. How to give without counting the cost. Her children said nothing, their silence heavier than any argument. But something in their eyes, perhaps shame, perhaps realization, had begun to shift. Slowly, painfully, but real. 6 months later, the city looked the same, but everything had changed. Tund walked down the same street where it all began, the air buzzing with engines and voices, the scent of roasted corn drifting from nearby stalls. The world moved around him as fast and indifferent as ever, cars honking, people rushing, but now he moved differently. He wore a clean suit, tailored and pressed. His shoes gleamed under the sun. His back was straight, his steps steady. Yet behind the success was the same heart, the same quiet humility that had once stopped in the middle of chaos to help a stranger. Then he saw her. An elderly woman, bent with age, struggling to carry 2 heavy bags of groceries. She stood at the edge of the road, one trembling hand clutching a plastic bag that looked seconds away from tearing. The traffic roared past without mercy, drivers shouting, horns blaring, no one slowing down. No one stopped. No one even looked. Except him. He crossed the road carefully, weaving between cars, the sunlight flashing across his face. When he reached her, he smiled, the same gentle, honest smile from all those months ago. "Let me help you, Ma." She looked up at him, startled, her tired eyes filling with gratitude. "Thank you, my son. Thank you." He took the bags from her trembling hands as though they were sacred. The weight didn't bother him. Together, they crossed slowly, step by step, through the chaos of traffic and noise. When they reached the other side, she turned to thank him again, her voice soft and warm. He nodded, smiled, and stepped aside as the traffic continued to flow behind him. The evening light glowed gold and warm, spilling across the street like a blessing. For a moment, he looked back, watching the crowd move, all the people rushing, not realizing that the smallest act of kindness can still stop time. Life had come full circle. It costs nothing to be kind, but it changes everything. Sometimes the whole city. If this story touched you, type kindness in the comments, and tell me honestly, if you were in his shoes, would you have stopped?